So the top wrist lock is one of the catch wrestling signature moves that I've had a hard time finding realistic setups for, or if maybe realistic is too strong a word. I would say um, setups that seem like they could have a high percentage possibility of working. But this particular clip of Al Massey versus Larry Hamilton has a really nice setup from the collar tie. So, uh, there's some collar tie negotiation, and at some point, the attacker laces with a grip that makes it a pretty short journey from the collar tie to like a double wrist entanglement. And just by way of contrast, the only other setups that I usually see for this are in historical European martial arts, like knife defenses and stuff like this, like the guy's holding a dagger, or some classical jiu-jitsu or even classic Gracie jiu-jitsu disarm techniques, and they're almost interchangeable, all those different sources that I mentioned by the way they kind of execute them. But I've never really looked at any of those and said, "Oh yeah, I can see the guy pulling that off." But this one, I actually think is one of the first cases where I've seen it, even though this isn't a scripted match, where I could look at the setup and say, "Oh yeah, I could see it getting pulled off that way." So right from the collar tie, he reaches over the head with very little space in between the two players' body and gets his double wrist grip. And it's such a tight grip, and like both, all the arms, both attacker arms and defender arms, are completely bent. So there's not this huge overextension. It's a really tight tangle of arms, and it makes it very easy for the attacker to turn it into a slick takedown, while the defender's basically trying to keep his shoulder from being hyperextended. So this would be a clip that, in my opinion, would be worth dissecting in terms of the technical execution for any viewers out there that have that sort of interest in decoding these old catch wrestling techniques and kind of taking the theater element out of it and getting back to its realistic roots wherever they're present. And I have to admit, I myself am going to be drilling this one just because it's one of the first ones that I've looked at and said, "Oh wow, I could actually see myself getting that in a grapple if I played my cards right." The only other exceptions to that being like I've come up with some setups from 2-on-1 Russians and maybe a handful of other positions, but this one's right from the collar tie, and I haven't seen that many other setups from the collar tie where I actually looked at it and said, "Yeah, that looks realistic." This would be the first one that I've come across.